Thanks, Lloyd. So Senator, the House put 3 amendments on Senate File 44. Do you want to talk about all 3 or just the last one?
I'm going to defer to Senator Ellis here. She's done a really good job of going through this, and I've been concurring with her thoughts on it, but she's got it worked really hard, so.
Mr. Chairman, I think the first 2 amendments, the first one was a standing committee amendment, which was deleted entirely in the amendment adopted by the House and Committee of the Whole. My understanding is that grandfathers in the bonding requirements of existing LMOs, but adds the increased bonding amounts for future LMOs. I don't think there was a problem from our perspective on doing that.
Okay.
So I think we can just focus on the 3rd reading amendment. And I think we're aware of what the situation is and the concern in Natrona County. After visiting with our colleagues, I think we're fine with including the language that you'll find on the page of the amendment, dealing on page 5 of the bill about limitations on the limited mining operation within an adjacent area, just that additional language found in paragraph G. I think we were fine with most of that, but not all of it. And so I think we want to focus our discussion on the 1,000-foot setback and then some of the existing language or additional language found in paragraph H on page 2 of the amendment.
So I'm going to let Representative Harshman address most of these. See, that's the nice thing with being chairman, you delegate. So. Representative Harshman, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Ellis, thank you for your work on this and your comments. So it was the parts I marked were language in H and the 1,000-foot setback on state lands.
Correct. The new language in A and then H.
Okay. And just as you look at Wyoming, about, 5-6% of our land is state lands. So 48% feds and, 44% is private land. So there's not a ton of these LMOs, and we're talking LMOs, not small mining or large mining operations. And really they're set up with, as we all know, not much regulation, nor should they be. It's usually a rancher or private landowner, but the thought was why that increased setback and was really about us as we all own our state lands and really being really great stewards. It's not private land, it's our state land and so that's why we set it back a little farther. But I think we're, if you've got ideas on a different distance or, certainly entertain that or love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, one argument, Mr. Chairman, is, now we're creating a distinction between dwellings that are not on state lands versus ones that are. So, that's our thinking is, for the existing statutory requirement is 300 feet, but now we're going to increase that to 1,000 feet. And that just means a significantly reduced amount of developable, is that a word this morning? Of sand and gravel that can be developed. So
Right.
That's the concern is I think we maybe have gone too far with 1,000.
Do you have any thoughts on a different distance or?
I'm going to defer to my chairman.
Representative Harshman, there's a couple of numbers been floating around there. I think the 500 number is fair. We've talked about 660, which conforms with other minerals. But in the case of what we're discussing here, that leaves really a lot of material in the ground that could be very profitable for these LMOs. So I think maybe a 500 number might be more appropriate.
Okay. Very good. And then the other part was on,
So just,
okay, Mr. Chairman, sorry.
so is that an agreement with the committee to move the 1,000 to drop it to 500? While we're
Yeah, I
doing these,
thought
we
maybe-
might as well take care of these as we go.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, my preference is to leave it at 3.
Okay.
So 5 would be a compromise.
Okay.
Do we all agree on that then? 500 is a compromise?
I'm in agreement.
Okay.
I understand the situation that we're just discussing in one area, and I think 500 is reasonable there, so.
Okay,
Then, Mr. Chairman, on paragraph H, there's the additional language, if the affected lands are state or school lands, the operator shall obtain approval from the county with a conditional use permit, and then there's also the added requirement of getting approval from the State Board of Land Commissioners. I think our concern is, I think we can understand the approval from the county. My understanding, though, is not all counties require a conditional use permit, so I think if we were to leave that language in there, it would need to say if applicable, because some counties may not want to enter into that space. But I would say that our concern is having the additional approval of the State Board of Land Commissioners, simply because my understanding is they meet every other month, and so that might prevent timely development. And then, just out of respect for our State Board of Land Commissioners, I understand these are state lands, but, do we really want our statewide electeds weighing in on a small gravel pit? So I think that would be our preference, would be to strike that language.
Mr. Chairman, I think,
Please,
thanks, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to, we have state lands, OSLI director, deputy director here, but, those meetings when I see it as kind of our consent list on third reading, a lot of those leases, there's a bunch of them, and they get approved. And I think, and these are, leases on state lands that I just think it's so important to have a public process on public lands, because we all own these lands. And I think particularly then in a situation, out in the middle of nowhere, it's not going to be a big issue. It's not going to be. These are small, little gravel pits, but when you're right behind people's houses, hundreds of houses, thousands of people, the public needs to have a forum where they can be heard. Now, if Natrona County didn't have that forum last night, they packed the county commission meeting, hundreds of people, but where would they go? And there's just no recourse, I think, for people's voices to be heard. And so I think, and the amount of mail and email that has come, I can imagine, to your office at State Lands, to the governor's office and the 5 electeds this week, they're like going, holy cow. And I would like to go back and look at that again. And I just think, there's one thing to grant the lease and to go out and do the exploration, dig some holes and find out. And this is a months-long process. This isn't days or weeks. And then to come back and say, yeah, this is a good prospect here. Okay, State Board, Board of Land Commissioners, we're ready to go. And then have them give the final stamp of approval, because we as a legislature have given those 5 the duty to take care and take care and work these lands and administer them. And that's what we've given them in statute, 100 years ago. So, but anyway, so that's my thought, just to make sure that people have a say in this, particularly on our state lands.
So, Senator Ellis, just a question on that. Would an either or approach work, do you think? Where if the county doesn't control this, that then it goes to state lands. If the county does, then OSLI doesn't.
I'm not sure if it does or not. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have to kind of stand with my senator here and say, I think this is more of a local control thing. I understand the state lands question, but I really think our counties are more than capable of making this decision. And
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Chairman, how would you, and I think, Senator Ellis, absolutely, not all counties have this process nor want it. And so I think your point on if applicable is very good, but then what about those counties that don't? I mean, where do the people go? I mean, that's it, I think.
So Representative, maybe that is the either or there. If the county doesn't, if it isn't applicable to the county, then we need to maybe make sure we do have some kind of approval. So Senator Ellis, any thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the difficulty here is just not knowing how many counties don't require a conditional use permit. My preference would be to, even before we require this, State Board of Land Commissioners to weigh in, to nudge our county friends to provide that process would be my preference. I just think this is an inherently local control type of issue, and you just don't want it starting to get politicized and, people that aren't familiar with these areas in Cheyenne weighing in on the particular nuances of a little gravel sand project.
So Representative Harshman, my recollection from a lot of the emails that all of us received was one concern is just what Senator Ellis said, which was local control. They almost every email I got had some mention of local control, wanted the county involved. So I think, leaving the county in there, even if they don't give a conditional use permit, I think, involving the county in some manner might work.
I think, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
I guess, just thinking about those stewards of our state lands, because a private landowner has to give permission, certainly, and the board, county commissioners would grant that conditional use permit, and the private landowner would say, okay, good, you have a nice sample that's going to work, okay, here's our agreements, and we sign it, and here's a little, royalty you'll pay me, or whatever it is, and I think as the owners of the land and the stewards for the owners, the people, I think should have, some way to approve that, to make sure that that's exactly what we want, not an approval that comes with dozens of other leases, that come to the board every month. That's my only thing, is that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle on a deal like this, and I think this is one that kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit, and it's a big deal.
So,
but I don't know.
So, Mr. Chairman, we do have the Office of State Lands here. Why don't Deputy Director, why don't you come on up, and I think we have some questions for you. Or maybe get your comments. So Director, Deputy Director, whoever wants to answer it, I think I'll ask the first question on this. So if it's a lease on any state-owned land, whether it's a school section or a penitentiary section or whatever, we tend to think of in terms of school sections, but there are other state lands out there. If someone wants to extract sand, gravel from those lands, do they have to get a permit or a lease through your office?
Mr. Chairman, just for the record, Jennifer Scoggin, Director of the Office of State Lands and Investments, and Deputy Director Jason Crowder with me. Mr. Chairman, you're correct. If somebody is interested in mining sand and gravel on a state trust land parcel or an institutional land parcel, they would have to come to the Board of Land Commissioners, apply for and receive a lease. And if I could just add on to that, the lease requires that the lessee comply with applicable state, local, federal regulations in carrying out their endeavor. The board does not tightly oversee that. We're providing an opportunity for the activity. We're not directing the project.
Representative Harshman, a question?
Director and Deputy, thanks for being here. And the 5 leases that were granted, 3 of them were in June of 23, and then 2 more in October, I think, of 23. How many other leases, did the Board of Land Commissioners take up during each of those meetings, just for an example? I mean, were these the only leases talked about on state lands?
Deputy Director? I saw the look which transferred the question to you.
Obligation came over, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman. Typically, there's not a lot of sand and gravel leases that come through in each board meeting. There are some renewals. It's important to note that sand and gravel leases are only offered for 2 years at a time. And they're very unique in that even when they reach production, they have to come back for renewal at the end of that 2 years. Typically, mineral leases get to continue their term as long as they're producing and operating and producing minerals. So it's just 2 years at a time. A lot of those get renewed that the board reviews because either they haven't received that production or that they are producing and they've just hit that 2-year time. On average, and I don't know about those 2 particular meetings, but on average, there are probably 2 or 3 that each board matter has within it. The rare occasion would be 5, 10, maybe 15 of them once a year or so that would come through in that amount. But for that particular board matter for just sand and gravel leases, there's not typically a great amount on the list.
So, Mr. Chairman, so is there?
Please.
Is there, I mean, is it kind of, and I could go back and look at tapes, but I don't spend a lot of time watching the board meetings, but are there, I mean, are all the other leases talked about too at a similar time? I mean, do you bring a lot of leases to the board, grazing leases, all those kind of things? And I guess, was there any time spent talking about these 5 leases in particular?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, generally speaking, if these are considered to be business as usual, there's not a whole lot of time spent talking about them. And in fact, a lot of times they go on the consent list. However, if we do have folks that are concerned about them and they notify us that they would like to talk with the board about them, we will pull them off. They will not be on a consent agenda.
Mr. Chairman, and then were these 5 leases, were they on the consent? I recall.
Mr. Chairman, I believe they were. They're not standing out to me as something that we pulled off and would have discussed.
And just, Mr. Chairman, and you know that there's this requirement in the LMO statutes to send a mailing to everybody within a mile, but that's not before the lease is granted by Board of Land Commissioners. That's before operations start, correct?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, yes, that's my understanding, is that they come to the board to obtain the lease first, and then they approach DEQ about getting a license to explore, and then they do their sampling and whatever they're going to do, and then they go back to DEQ if they want to do a limited mining operation or something of that nature.
So just so I understand then, Mr. Chairman, so once you grant the lease, you don't take a second look at it then, Mr. Chairman? And I mean, generally, it's in DEQ's hands, and that's the way the statute's created for them to work.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, that's true. Unless we find somebody to be in breach of the lease, then we would obviously take another
Sure.
look at it. But as long as they're in compliance with our rules and the terms of the lease, then yes, DEQ obviously has the oversight of the mining operation.
And Mr. Chairman, just finally too, and I just want to be crystal clear, everybody involved in this is totally following the rules, doing it just the way they should in a perfectly ethical manner. It's not any of that. I think it's just kind of like maybe a loophole in our statutes or something where people are like, wow, why is that tractor up there on a non-motorized section digging? And then they're first learned about it, and now what's our recourse, because we don't want that behind our house. And so obviously the board would never get to hear about that in our current system. I mean,
Director?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, that's likely true unless we learned that they were up there exploring without the proper authorities from DEQ, then we would probably take a look at it.
which, yeah, Director and Mr. Chairman, which is not the case in this. Everybody is, acted. I just want to be really clear about that. Not only the leaseholder, but all these people are in my district, and they've all done a great job. And the way they've voiced their opinions, the way they've got the permits, everything is above board. So just clear on that. So, okay, well, thank you. Appreciate your
Mr. Chairman,
information.
if I could
Deputy
just add
Director.
a little bit to that conversation. There are a lot of parcels that are open to public use. The majority of them, as long as you can get there, you can utilize them for public activities. The parcels we're talking about here don't have a lease for public recreational use. It's just that open general day use type of a situation. When we do offer a sand and gravel lease, it is for the full parcel, and we do it section by section or portion of that section by section. And as you mentioned, the limited mining operation is only for 15 acres. So while they may have the full section under lease, they can only operate on 15 acres at a time. To your question about how does that impact the recreation or the normal use of the property going forward, if somebody raised that concern to us or saw that a track hoe was up there and thought that that might limit their recreational experience, obviously they could call us and we can answer that question and provide that answer specifically. But also they could put a lease, a temporary use permit or a special use lease on top of that sand and gravel lease and continue to have both happen at the exact same time, understanding the limitations one would have on the other. So the sand and gravel would understand where the trails were and we would work with them to make sure that they were mining in a way that didn't fully impact that or had some mitigation in there. And same with the recreation. You would understand where the mine was and so you could go around it, you could move the trails and have that at both experiences at the same time.
Mr. Chairman, and just to follow up on that, and I think you brought up another issue, and I don't want to go down this path, but this idea of daisy chaining, and that's why the DEQ rules, spoke with the DEQ director and spoke with the leaseholder and people there, but it was brought to my attention that the idea would be to start on 15 acres, reclaim 5 of it, keep working the 10 and move over and start another 5. And so it's not 15 acres in one spot. Right, and I think that's what this amendment tries to make sure that we, because I don't think anybody realized that, and that this could be an ongoing thing, but not to exceed 15 acres. And then the other thing about LMOs, and I'm all for LMOs. We need sand and gravel. It's not about that. We know I think that as I toured that last Saturday, all kinds of springs. I mean, there's springs popping up all over, and I think people are really concerned about the water flow. And of course, the LMOs don't have to take that into account, that or air quality. So I think that's just an issue, I think, why it's so important. Not on, most of them it's going to be pretty easy for the board, but I think this one it's going to take a little more time. And right now, we just don't have that process where they have to have a second look at it. So that's why. Amendment. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And just remember, we're here to discuss the difference between the House and Senate position and kind of stay on that topic, please, for all of us.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this is my concern. The person wanting to develop sand and gravel will go to you to get a lease. Then they go to the county, then they get other permits. And then we want them to come back to you again and say, okay, we did it again. What additional approval do we need? I've read your rules. Right? And so even if in this particular instance, if these rules were applicable, the person would come up to, or the developer would come to you and say, yep, we have the lease that you're required to get, check. And you guys checked off all your rules. And then they went to the county and they check off the rules. So you wouldn't have grounds to deny them, right? You would just have to say, thanks for coming back. Yes, you checked all the boxes. Thanks, additional approval granted. Like we haven't given you a basis of, well, there's public opposition to this, so we're going to deny it. So that's the part of this that I'm missing is like what adds to this from a legal perspective, how are they another stopgap? And then all of the concerns you raise, Senator or Representative, have to do with water quality and perhaps air quality, which are all within the DEQ, not within Office of State Lands. So I just think this is the wrong remedy for the concerns that you just raised.
Mr. Chairman, I'd have to agree with my colleague. The state lands has already done their job by the time we get to this point. I think it needs to fall back to the county to issue that permit. The state has done their job. They've vetted it. The boxes are checked. Everything's in order on the state land side. So.
Mr. Chairman.
Please.
one final thought too is, this bill was brought and worked in the interim. It's a committee bill. We've had a lot of discussion. We've removed language in there that was controversial because we recognize the importance of moving it forward. I think we understand what's going on in Natrona County. I think if we want to continue to work on this and see if we can put better sideboards going forward in the future, that might be an appropriate interim topic for us to look at. But as it's worded in this particular amendment today, I don't think it gets after the concern that I'm hearing from the Natrona County residents. And I just think it needs to be thought through a little bit more. And so that's my concern about just ad hoc adding this additional language in there.
Representative Larson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So based off the discussion, I think a solution we could come to, and maybe this does need to still be worked in the interim, is if someone's going to go after a state land lease with the intention of going or doing the limited mining operations, that mailing to the people within that area needs to happen before they get the lease. I know that's in two different sections of statute, but I think that might solve the problem, because then people will have the notification prior to any lease. So that might be a solution.
So Representative, that's a good thought and a good suggestion on a solution. However, I think that is outside of what we're doing here, which is to reconcile the difference between the House position and the Senate position. So any suggestions?
Mr. Chairman, I think, most everything we do in the legislature is brought to us from constituents' ideas and concerns. So, and I think we've found a flaw in our system, and we're trying to fix that. And I think the key is having public involvement, and particularly on public lands that the people own, and I think on these state lands. And so I think that's really important. The issue really is not the air and the land quality with an LMO. I understand that, but I think the board, when they run into a deal, is going to want to have a second chance. And I just think it's important that you've granted the lease, exploration has gone on. Hey, it looks great. Okay, we'll grant you're okay to move forward with the limited mining operation. I don't think that's a onerous thing on industry or our contractors, anyone else. But I do think it gives us a chance to make sure that before we start, mining our state lands, and particularly these ones that are right next to people, that the public has had a fair shot at this. So that's the spirit why the House adopted it, I think. And, and I think going back to what was said maybe 15 minutes ago, and I think Senator Ellis, the 6 counties that don't have these conditional use permits or whatever that number, I think I've heard that number, but maybe it is an and or an or deal. Maybe that's a way to kind of solve this. I don't know.
Mr. Chairman.
That was proposed a while.
Senator Ellis?
So I want to be clear, these are not public lands in the sense of how we think of BLM or Forest Service or national parks. State lands exist to generate revenue for Wyoming, right? And so we've had that conversation ad nauseum, certainly on our end of the chamber, as we talked about the Kelly parcel. And so that is the duty of Office of State Lands, right? So I think my concern with the or language, if the county doesn't issue conditional use permits, then we're asking state lands to assume the role of the county to take on that task. So do they look at, then they're the ones enforcing county regulations? Like, it just seems a bit of a stretch. If the county doesn't have the infrastructure and the rules, and what metrics are they supposed to use? And they have rules that talk about what they can do when it comes to the leasing and the plan. That's well thought out. And counties that require conditional use permits will have requirements. So the counties that don't require it, what are we asking state lands then to base their decision on, if we're asking them to assume the role of the county? Again, I don't disagree with the concern out there in Natrona County. I'm just trying to think this through and how this would work for our Office of State Lands and when they take it to the board for approval. So that's my concern with the or. Very important issue, certainly one, Mr. Chairman, I think we could, I would happily look into this in the interim, but I don't think we're getting there today, and I don't think this is quite the right time to try and fix it.
Okay, so thank you, Senator Ellis, and yeah, I think we've gotten into some areas that we may need to consider in the interim. We have some issues that vary that we didn't really take into consideration during this past interim when the bill was prepared. So just in the spirit of excuse me, compromise, and to get us started, because we are running out of time, I would propose the following amendment. On page 2, line 6, after limited mining operations, insert if appropriate, and then on line 8, put a period after occur. And at this point, leave the discussion of state lands out, and with my commitment to take this up on the interim. So that paragraph H would read, if the affected lands are state or school section school lands, before commencing any limited mining operation, if appropriate, the operator shall obtain a conditional use permit from the county where the limited mining operation will occur, period, and delete everything from word and through the rest of the paragraph. Is that a reasonable compromise?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
just a
Representative.
question on the if appropriate, I think is
Okay,
problematic, but.
Senator Ellis?
Mr. Chairman, I like where you're going. I think we could leave this to LSO. My thought was on page 2 of the amendment, after the word occur, insert if a conditional use permit is required in the affected county, but I would leave it that to the LSO to wordsmith that a little bit, but that would be the spirit of the amendment.
I think that would work.
And not have.
And not have the if
Not have the
appropriate.
mention of,
But I think it's the same thing we're trying to get after.
yes. I think that is a reasonable compromise.
You know what, my
House?
question, Mr.
Oh,
Chairman,
go ahead.
I just, kind of back to and about those counties that don't have that. And I think that's really good. I mean, it's, because it gives the public a place to, be heard. And I think there were hundreds last night at the listening session for the Natrona County Commission. Really good. I mean, that's what we want, people to be involved. So I think that's really good. For these folks that don't have one, yeah, maybe you study that, but I think, counties are the instrument of the state, right? They are. And so I think that's an important thing. And I think, yeah, anyway, I'm gonna stop there. So I think Representative or Senator Ellis says on line 5, 6, and 7 is all the same. Then after occur on line 8, could you just repeat what your thoughts were? You said it. I think you said it correctly.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Senator?
Obtain a conditional use permit from the county where the limited mining operation will occur if a conditional use permit is required in the affected county. And then strike the rest of the language on 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
Okay, is that acceptable, committee?
I think that's good. And I think
House?
that works.
Okay, Senate?
I'm good.
Okay, so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, anything else on this bill? And again, I'll reiterate my commitment that I think we need to revisit this during the interim. Director Scoggins, how do you feel about doing that in the interim?
Mr. Chairman, we'd be happy to participate and provide any information that we have on this.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think we are now adjourned. And it falls to Senator Cooper because the Senate did not concur to do the paperwork and will sign the papers. And remember, Senator, the chairman sign in red.
Okay.
I have already been told that this morning by our chief clerk, and I have one too. Thank you, everyone.
All right, good.